Hey everyone, today's guest is Kenneth Scott. Kenneth is a software developer, mathematician, biohacker, and a seed investor in biotech companies that address age-related diseases. His mission is to challenge the conventional approach to health and lifespan by emphasizing rejuvenation as the ultimate goal for achieving longevity and possibly even immortality. Today, we'll get into Kenneth's approach for longevity. So with that, welcome Kenneth.
Great to be here, Michael. I'm so impressed that you have a little time to chat.
Yeah, that's great. So I think the biggest fish to address first is most of us in the longevity space are relatively young. It's rare to see, someone of your current chronological age running around and doing it well, and with an interest in the science of the longevity too, which is also something I think that makes you unique and a unicorn in this space. So, for people who don't know, could you tell people what your chronological age is, and then we can jump into your longevity journey, how you got into this space.
Yeah, so in about 2 weeks, I complete my 82nd orbit of the sun. I'm in my ninth decade. You, a youngster, are 2 or 3 or 4 decades younger than me, and probably a lot of the people listening to this podcast are. When I go to concerts or conferences, rather, and I meet the young people who are so keen on achieving longevity, and I certainly encourage them and hope they get there. But we're talking half a century of difference of age. So, yeah, 82.
Yeah, so you've lived it, right? That makes you uniquely qualified, whereas most of us are, you know, saying this is the science and this is the best way to increase our odds. You've actually gotten to the first part of it, which is living past the average lifespan, at least for a man, right? So how did you get into, the longevity space? So were you always interested in longevity, or did this change at some point in the past?
Well, I think like a lot of young people today, it hit me when I was about 22 years old, I think. My grandfather died. He'd had a rough few years towards the end of his life. He was overweight, he had heart disease, he had diabetes, he started to suffer from dementia. And I thought, I don't want to go that way. And at that point, I wasn't so much thinking I didn't necessarily want to go. I sort of accepted I did. That evolved later. I don't really want to go now. Uh, the but seeing an older person that you love pass away, go through decline, can be very, very stimulating and motivating in terms of your personal lifestyle. And I think pretty well from that point on, I tried to do what I could to not go down that path. And so uh, at that time, I was a young military officer, and so we had a certain ethos for physical fitness and so on. And so I did a bit of that. I've never been particularly athletic in the sense of being competitive. I'm a small person. I don't get into competitive sports like hockey or football. I would just get wiped out by one hit. But at the same time, in my 20s, I was always jogging a bit. I always played a bit of tennis. I skied, things like that. Physical activities that were sort of non-competitive, non-sport, or non-team at least, where I could be, functioning. I also was typically always several years younger than everybody else in my peer group. I finished high school when I was 16. I graduated when I was 20. Everybody in my work environment was 2, 3, 4 years older than me. And of course, during the teen years, they were physically bigger than me. And so from a athletic point of view or a fitness point of view, I did things all along that would hopefully keep me in reasonable shape. And that was, sort of one thing. The other thing was food. And unlike you and people of your generation and younger people, my early years were very, very different in terms of nutrition. So I was born in Scotland during World War II. We had a diet that we now refer to in the longevity space as caloric restriction. There was no food. certainly no surplus food. We had a very minor amount of food and nothing surplus. And we had no meat. We had no fish. It was vegetables. So we were on sort of a whole foods plant-based diet because all of the food was also organic. There were no pesticides, no herbicides. Everything was very clean and pure. So for the first 15, 20 years of my life, that was my diet. And that gives you, I think, a very different kind of a body than someone who was born, say, in the mid-50s or later, where food was now processed. There was lots of food, and people really ate food that was not organic. It was, grown in fields that were sprayed with pesticides and herbicides. I can remember some of the first spraying of crops in the about 53 or so in Western Canada at my grandparents' farm. And, it was recognized that these pesticides were bad, and we all had to stay inside when the spraying was done. And my grandfather, who was out there spraying, took significant precautions to his own health. That is, he put a kerchief over his face. And, that was the way the world was in those days. But what it meant was that people in my generation, generally as children, had a much different diet, and I think are fundamentally healthier as a result of that. Certainly, if you grow up with the overcaloric world that we have today, we see children who are obese at the age of 5 or something. That never happened. There was nobody obese in my childhood. None of the adults were overweight. I saw an ad on or an article on the internet the other day, and it was a picture of a couple in the early 50s. And the caption under the photo was, "Why were people in the 50s so skinny?" And I looked at the photo and I said, that's normal, So those were sort of the two things that were in my mind in those days, that you needed to eat properly and you needed to get some exercise. And I think those are certainly true today. And the fact that we were eating basically wholesome food made a lot of difference. Over the years, of course, I got into eating some of the processed food, and that led to me ultimately having stents put in my heart. Probably not necessary, but that's a different story. In any case, the nutrition and the food were what started it. Then, when I was about 40 years old, back in 82, I guess about the time you were born, the book came out called Life Extension by Dirk Pearson and Sandy Shaw. And they were big on really pushing the exercise and big on supplements. There weren't that many supplements on the market in those days, so lots of vitamin C and so on and so forth. But I can remember reading that, and I guess in part being motivated by the fact that here were people interested in this topic, which is something that interested me. And that was a bit of a boost, and it got me back into it a bit. But there really wasn't much in the longevity space at that time. Then about 2002, I got a situation where I was suffering from infections, sinus infections, and so on continually. And I'd been to doctors and they'd put me on antibiotics. And I really went through about 20 years of far too many antibiotics to treat this problem. And eventually I remembered something that my grandmother taught me. And, if you're lucky, your grandmother taught you this too, because my grandmother, when I was about 10, really taught me what I needed to know about nutrition. She said, you are what you eat. And she also said, eat your greens, by which she meant vegetables. But I remembered that. I was, 60 years old or something, and I thought, gee, maybe the way I solved this is to stop eating. And I stopped eating. I fasted for about a week. My sinus infection went away. Amazing, eh? So imagine, if you're on a water diet for a week or so, and you're going to come back into the food domain, probably the first thing you do is have some bread, a diet of bread and water, right? Nice, simple diet. Started eating bread, my sinuses plugged up. Stopped the bread, sinuses cleared. So eventually determined that I had a gluten sensitivity, which was frustrating and started to open my mind a little bit more onto the whole medical thing because I'd been to doctors many times and been tested for allergies and so on and so forth. And they'd been feeding me antibiotics and antihistamines and so on. And here it was that I had a gluten sensitivity. Well, if they couldn't figure that out, it sort of struck me a little bit at that time. I really have to know my body. And so, one of the things that I tell people today is listen to your body, know your body. You live with it 7/24. In today's world, if you go and see a medical practitioner, you spend 10, 15 minutes with them and they give you, they go to the computer screen and they type in some data and they come out with a prescription. And I'm afraid that's not really medicine. And you really have to look after yourself. And I would say that virtually anybody who is going to achieve longevity has to take responsibility for their own medical care. Yes, you can work and interact with the medical profession, and they have access to tools and testing and so on that you don't necessarily have, but you should drive the process. And one of the ways that I do that is that for me, when I meet with a medical practitioner, a doctor, he'll usually call me Ken and say, I'm Dr. So-and-so. I then reply saying, hello, Joe, or whatever his first name is. And that usually stuns them. But look, this guy is just a partner of mine looking after my body. And he's a junior partner. And I'm not calling him sir or doctor. He knows less about my body than I do. I can respect that he has a doctor, an MD or whatever. Well, I got some degrees, but what he knows about medicine has very little to do with my body.
Can I tell you quick interjection? I don't want to interrupt your story because I know that there's more to it, but I do exactly the same thing. That's why I was smiling. But granted, I'm coming at it as, I have the credentials. I have a PhD in physiology, right? And actually, in terms of the biochemistry, I probably understand the CBC, kidney function, liver function, immune function. I mean, they're looking at a reference range, and I've studied this so heavily, I probably understand it more than them. So I'm exactly the same that when they'll say, oh, it's Dr. So-and-so, I'll say, hey, Jacob, or whatever their first name is. And like you said, it stuns them, but they're used to dealing with people who are, and I'm not anti-medical establishment by any means, but they're used to dealing with people who are subservient. And I do that so that they know, look, we're coming at least on an even playing field. If not, you should be listening to what I'm saying in this situation because I've studied this heavily. Whereas, like you mentioned, you're looking at a screen for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and trying to get a guess on what my actual overall history is. So, totally
Yeah,
agree.
exactly. And, I don't have degrees in medicine or bio, but I've been studying this for 60 or 70 years. And you learn not necessarily through getting degrees, but through various processes. And I haven't necessarily taken the courses. There's a pile of books back there. I've read them all. And I've got the experience. And as I said, these medical doctors who are, say, in their 30s or 40s, if I'm dealing with them, I think it's something like less than 7% of MDs over the age of 70 are working. And more than half of those are probably in administrative positions or, doing a couple of hours a week. So what are the chances of me finding a medical doctor who has the experience of working with 80-year-olds, the firsthand experience of understanding what they're like? Virtually zilch, okay?
And healthy 80-year-olds, not chronically dependent on medications, with the goal of optimal health, not sick care, right? It's an even smaller, bubble.
Yeah. So, given that, uh, as I say, I interact with them mostly to get access to testing that's not otherwise accessible in our society without me going offshore, which I sometimes have to do.
Yeah, so we'll get into the rejuvenation in a bit, but okay, I had a whole bunch of questions in there. One of them is longevity genes, but before we get there, because you mentioned your grandfather and Alzheimer's disease, so in your 20s or so, even in your teens, probably Jack LaLanne was a big deal on television, and he was talking about health and fitness and longevity, and he couldn't die; it'd be bad for his image. So did that have any impact, or that was kind of, not on the radar as deeply at that time?
Well, I'd like you to understand that I never had TV before 1960. Okay. TV was not really part of the society that I lived in. And, uh, there was nothing like an internet or any of that sort of stuff. So, no, just really didn't see any of that kind of information. Um, just wasn't there.
And then, so you mentioned Dirk and Sandy Shaw. So it's funny because I too, probably one of my earliest motivations in this field was going to the magazine store, which there were such a thing at the time when I was growing up, and seeing Life Extension magazine because that's the only place that would highlight their work. I
Yeah.
didn't read their book, but I knew of their names and who they were because Life Extension magazine was highlighting them in the thing. So and I read, Life Extension magazine basically religiously every time it came out from my teenage years, probably till about, I don't know, 10 years ago. So that had a huge impact on me. So was it the same for you where Life Extension, that was one of the few places that was on your radar and reading the
That,
magazine?
that was the only book. I never saw the magazine.
Ah,
Um, Bill Falloon. Well, I was living in Canada at that time. Okay. So Life Extension magazine comes out of Bill Falloon's organization. It was an American marketplace at that time. I was chatting with Bill a few months ago, and he said the biggest thing that ever happened for his business was the book by Dirk and Sandy, because all of a sudden, Life Extension was all over the place.
yeah.
So that's really quite interesting.
So interesting. So the magazine wasn't so much on your radar, but the book was. So
Yeah.
okay, all right. So then taking it back, so longevity genes. I think a lot of people are going to say, well, all right, you're 82, your parents and their parents probably lived a relatively long time. So what was the age of your grandparents and then your parents? Are they still, are your parents still alive or everybody has gone?
My father died 12 years ago, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, maybe. Um, and my mother died back in 86. Okay. My mother, in her last 10 years, had Parkinson's and ultimately died of a heart attack at about the age of, I think, 68 or 9, something like that. My father was 88 when he passed away. But one of the things that we always have to look at when we're looking at numbers is how alive was that individual. So for the last 5 to 8 years of my father's life, he was in decline, having TIAs, these transsystemic activities, what are there? Strokes, mini strokes.
Yeah.
And so that was my immediate parents. My father's parents, my grandfather died at the age of 62. My grandmother, rather interestingly, was about the same age. And sorry, he was 72 in 62. And my grandmother at that age was 70-ish. She changed careers. She repurposed. She went out to work. And she started looking after old ladies who were younger than her. And then she looked after children, and she kept on that kind of stuff until she was in her early 90s and died at about the age of 96, I think. And my maternal grandparents, my grandfather died from a perforated ulcer, which this was back in about 1922 in Wales, which was a poverty-stricken part of the world. And he died from that. Never kill anybody today, but in those days it did. And then his wife, my grandmother, very sadly died from a botched abortion a few years later. And of course, that wouldn't happen anymore. but it was the sign of the times, the kind of medical care that existed. So medicine has done some things that are beneficial, but on the other hand, they keep people alive a lot longer than they might otherwise be. My father died probably 7 or 8 years after he would otherwise have passed away from one of his strokes. My mother probably would have died 5 to 10 years earlier, when shortly after being first diagnosed with Parkinson's. So do I have long-lived genes? Not particularly.
Brothers and sisters?
They're all alive. I have a half sister who's 87 now, 5 years older than me. But she's had heart attacks and she's kept alive through medicine. I have a younger brother who had a brain aneurysm, which would have killed him, except his wife was a ER nurse, and she recognized the symptoms and was able to get him through the system quickly and get him operated on within a couple of hours, which, was amazing. So he's still alive. And then I have a sister, and she's got heart problems. So there seems to be, a cardiovascular problem, probably stemming from my mom's lineage. As I said, I've got stents in my heart, although I think that they should never have been put in. One of the problems back 20 odd years ago was that if there was a blockage detected, they immediately stuck stents in. There was little understanding of the angiogenesis that was probably occurring, and little understanding of the fact that diet would probably change it, which is, what Esselstyn basically did in his book that I read, and it changed my life.
All right, yeah, wait, before we go into the stents and changing your diet, your sister, how old is your sister?
I have one that's 87, an older half sister, and I have a younger sister who is 80 now.
So all of your siblings still alive and in their 80s.
My brother is 72.
72. Okay. All right. So nobody reaching 100, at least not yet. So,
Well, and quite frankly, my siblings are not in good health.
right.
They're kept alive by the medical system, and you can argue the ethics and the value of all that, but I talk of the concept of vitality. You mentioned, sort of reaching life expectancy or exceeding it. I sort of look at that as being about 80 years old. And most people at this point in life are under care. They're being cared for medically. They're being cared for with respect to mobility. They can't move. Most people who are 80 years old can no longer travel by themselves. If you're 80 years old and you go to the UK, you can't rent a car. And if you go to Panama and you're 70 years old, you can't rent a car. Okay, so mobility clamps down on you. But I see elderly people in the airports, and yeah, they may be traveling, but they've all got a travel companion, or they're being cared for by an organization which takes them from the curb onto the aircraft, and they're met at the other end by a similar organization which gets them, out. So the kinds of travel that I do, I've been in, I think, about 9 different countries this year. I just got back from London a few days ago. Most people my age don't do that.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about countries or even states that could ban above a certain age from driving. I mean, that would make me crazy with anger, like, especially when I'm far from that, but when I do get there and I'm expecting to be in good health, I'd imagine I'd be furious that,
Well, it's ageism, right?
yeah, yep.
And it's a bureaucratic law. In the United States and Canada, if you have a valid license, you can generally rent a car. Now, in this country, in the United States, I don't think we tolerate that kind of imposition. But yeah, those are the kinds of things that happen. Here's another example. We would probably talk about biohacking a little bit, but if you are my age and you want to get involved in a clinical trial, you might be prevented because you're too old. it's a clinical trial that's dealing with something that's related to longevity, but you're too old to go on the trial, you know.
Which studies, which studies? So they had a hard cutoff, what, less than 80, I guess 65 to 80?
I think 80 is, in some sense, a cutoff. I know that I went through the process of filling out a form online to have involved in a hearing test or development, some therapy to improve hearing. And I filled it all out, and it was about 3 or 4 pages with all sorts of detail. And then at the last page, at the bottom line, it says, now please attest that you're not more than 55 years old. Well, you know, people at 55 don't normally have hearing problems. That tends to develop more in the 65, 70 age range.
Well, maybe accelerating, poor diets, ultra processed foods, overweight, obesity, probably increased risk factors for a quicker hearing
Yeah,
loss.
could be. Yeah.
All right, so the stent. So going back to the stent. So I know because we talked about it in earlier calls that your diet was different, and once you switched that, you made the dietary change. Your health has been better since that time. So for people who don't know, what was your diet before the stents? And this isn't me promoting one diet over another. This is just your experience, your lived experience. It worked better for you. So I think it's important to hear that. So what was your diet before, and how'd you make that change?
First of all, I would agree with you. All I'm reporting is N equal 1 results. This is my experience.
Okay.
But on the other hand, there's a lot of validation for the experience that I've had. And so my diet, before I changed it, was by some standards cautious and not all that bad. I didn't eat a lot. I traveled a lot. And when you travel, it's hard to get food. And so typically I would have breakfast when I was on the road, and I would typically have bacon and eggs, fairly standard American breakfast. I would usually skip lunch. Every other day I would skip supper. So I'd have breakfast and then no other meals in the day. And then on the second day, I'd go to a good restaurant and I would have probably a nice steak and potatoes and a vegetable and a glass or two of wine. And that was the kind of diet that I had when I was on the road. And in a sense, it wasn't too different from that at home. We didn't eat fast food. I never was big on burgers and chips and stuff like that. We didn't have snack food at home. It was typically, a reasonably good diet, but it was relatively heavy on meats and fats. And over a period of 40 years or so, my weight, 45 years, my weight went from being 120 or so pounds, which I was at the age of 20, to 145. And people looked at me and thought I looked okay, and I didn't look particularly fat. But I changed my diet and I lost 25 pounds, 15% of my body weight. And what I was losing was fat. So I had accumulated in those 40 years, 25 pounds of fat. And my belt size decreased by 5 inches.
And then your cardiovascular status after the change.
That's what happened.
And your cardiovascular status. So your cardiovascular status, your markers of cardiovascular status improved. I mean, so I guess you were looking at calcification and atherosclerotic plaque buildup before and then after, and then tracking progression over time. How is your status, your cardiovascular health status changed since before the dietary change?
Yeah. So what happened was that although I'd had the stents put in, of course, that was just, a surgical technique. It didn't really change my physiology. I hadn't changed my diet particularly at that point. But a year after my father passed away, I read the book by Caldwell Esselstyn Jr. titled Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. And it's a nice book. I recommend it to anybody. Essie, by the way, Dr. Esselstyn, turned 91 2 days ago. Quite a nice achievement. Yes. And he's quite a vital kind of guy. Anyway, his book was very straightforward, easy to read. I read it on a flight. It's a I think, 250, 300 pages. And the first half of the book is the thesis, and the second half is menus. And the thesis is your diet should be a very simple one. And I like the diet because I could memorize it very quickly. And I didn't have to do any counting of calories or anything. And it was a very simple dictate. And it was 4 little phrases. 3 phrases have 2 words, and the 4th phrase has 3 words. And even to make it simpler, the first word in each phrase is no. And so it was no fish, no meat, no dairy, no added oils. And I thought, gee, I can do that. That's simple. And I arrived at my apartment in Ottawa, which was where I happened to be heading at that time. And I went to my fridge and I threw all the meat out. And I'd never been one to eat much dairy, although I used to drink a lot of milk when I was younger. I went on that diet. And, over a period of 2 to 3 years, it really, really changed my physiology. The first thing that happened, and it happened very quickly, probably in a period of 4 to 6 weeks, is my cholesterol went from being in the 200 to 220 range down to about 160, and that's where it stays. Now that's total cholesterol, and I don't really look at all the little pieces, the triglycerides and the HDL and the LDL and all that stuff. If your total cholesterol is down at 160, it's not really a big issue. Then I, in about 3 months or so, lost 25 pounds. On that diet, you'll lose 10 pounds a month. And so anybody who's got an obesity issue, an overweight issue, and there was something I was watching in the last day or two, somewhere near 80, I guess it was on the news yesterday, somewhere near 80% of Americans are overweight or obese. And 80%, that's amazing. That means a BMI greater than 26 or something. My BMI is 17.9. And that on the scale, I'm underweight. But the BMI of virtually everybody when I was a child was around 17 or 18 or 19. I don't consider it to be underweight at all. I consider it to be normal. Anyway, I lost in about 3 months, 25 pounds. And then gradually over the subsequent 2 or 3 years, I noticed a number of other improvements in my health. I had always had a lot of trouble with allergies. Very allergic to animals, to dogs and cats, terribly allergic to goldenrod and grass pollens and so on. Excuse me. And within a couple of 3 years, I lost my my allergic problem with dogs and cats. It's gone completely. With respect to the plant pollens like goldenrod and so on, I'm still sensitive, but nowhere near the level that I was before. So that's a huge, huge improvement in just my well-being. I used to have a problem where I'd get all excited in work or community or whatever, and I'd be charging away doing things, and allergy season would come, and I'd just get wiped out for 2 months. And things would just go flop, and that doesn't happen anymore. I can keep going. So that was exciting. And then I think one of the things that really struck me as interesting was one day I was driving down the street here in Florida where I live, and for some reason or other, I was thinking in German. And I hadn't thought in German for at least 30 years. And that was just amazing to me. Obviously, parts of my brain were clearing out. And so I think that there is clear reversal of the clotting or the blockage in the arteries if you get onto this diet. Now that's shown in one of the images in Esselstyn's book. And it's one of the reasons I adopted the diet, because he has a photograph in the book of a man's heart, and it shows the clear blockage of the LADP. I think that's right, is it? LADP? And then it shows that man's heart 3 years later after he's been on the diet. And the photographs are really striking because you see this massive blockage in the first picture, and the guy could barely walk 50 feet without stopping to rest and so on. And then 3 years later, and in fact, in a month or two, he could walk again. But 3 years later, his heart is clear. And the thing that really struck me as interesting about that was I have similar photographs of my heart. And the first photograph was taken about 3 or 4 minutes before the second. The second was after they stuck stents in. And I thought, oh my God, I had to have a surgical procedure when all I had to do is change what I eat. Like, what's wrong with what we're doing? And we need to, get this message across to people that the diet will make the difference. And it's pretty clear, and there's a lot of research and stuff. If you're on a diet, which is a whole foods, plant-based diet, or perhaps a Mediterranean diet, one of these diets, which is very heavy on fruits and vegetables and minimal on consumption of meat and dairy products, you're going to be a lot healthier. You're not going to be obese. You're not going to probably get cardiovascular disease unless you've got a really terrible situation. And you're not going to get diabetes, not going to get cancer.
So I'm with you. I'm with you on that. I'm just going to play devil's advocate in that, I think for your physiology, obviously, whole, at that time, whole eating real food, mostly plant or exclusively plant-based, going full vegan was best for your physiology. But just to play devil's advocate, there may be people who don't respond well to that, whether they've got autoimmune issues or not, or other stuff. And for them, minimizing, plant products is better. So I'm open-minded that, there isn't a one-size-fit-all approach, but to your point about the obesity epidemic. So one of my recent studies, so standard mouse chow is corn, wheat, oats, and then it's got some oil and it's got fish.
Mhm.
And that's like the gold standard of rodent studies because the worst diet compared to that is they just feed them like lard and, oil and casein, milk protein, no real food, right? So the chow is better than the processed version. So I designed a whole food, not vegan, so it had fish, but it was also rich in fruits and vegetables, which standard chow is not. It's just grain-based. So that diet ended up being 3 times higher in terms of soluble fiber content. As you know, soluble fiber being fermented by gut bacteria. So you've got that. So 3 times higher soluble fiber intake per calorie. And the mice were allowed to eat as much as they wanted. These were aged mice, so very old mice. It was 22 to 24 months. These weren't like, teenage mice. This is at least middle age. They could eat as much as they wanted whenever they wanted. Exactly what happened to you is what happened to the aged mice. About 20% of their body weight, they lost 20% of their body weight despite eating the same amount of calories as the standard child group. And we did body composition analysis on them. It was almost exclusively from fat mass. There was almost no loss. In fact, their body composition improved where a higher percentage of lean mass, a reduced percentage of fat mass. So now I don't want to extrapolate and say that diet will work for all people. But especially if you have cardiovascular issues, if you mentioned, and being overweight is an issue, I think eating a very high fiber diet can most definitely help.
Well, what I would say is that we're gamblers, all of us. Every morning when you wake up, it's a gamble. Okay. Now, I described my experience over a period of 1 to 3 months. If you're 60 years old and you've got an obesity issue, a cardiovascular issue, even a cancer issue, take a month or two. That's an incredibly small portion of your life, less than 1%. And gamble that 1% of your life on this diet and see what happens. If it works for you, great, stick with it. If it doesn't, then you're still looking.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%, but I also see the other side of the fence where it's, there are just some people who don't react well to plant foods, and they have to
Well,
minimize.
I'm not arguing with you on that, but
Yeah.
I'm saying if you've got a problem, then you should be taking action. And
Yes.
this is an action that you can take at very low cost in terms of time or money, and you're going to know the results in 6 weeks, 2 months.
Yeah. So the only problem with that is when you've got, like you said, so your generation and, maybe the generation after grew up on real food. And then, later on, 60s, 70s, 80s, growing up on junk food. So you've got people who are perpetually addicted to ultra processed food so that when they eat real food, it's like, this isn't hyper palatable. I don't like it. And then, they can't stick to it. So then they're dependent on the medical system to try to save them. Whereas, as you mentioned, maybe if you just change your diet, try it for a month, it could improve. But it's very hard because they haven't trained their brain. The signaling is
Well,
so messed up.
I really don't like you to say it's very hard. I think that's a cop out by the medical profession.
Not for
Okay.
me, but I can for the
No,
people.
I don't think anybody should be saying it's very hard.
Yeah,
Okay. I think that's a real put down. It's a little bit like Terry Grossman, who runs the clinic out in Denver, the wellness clinic. And I went through the process of being tested by him and so on and so forth. And we got to the point of the diet. And I said, well, I should just go on a vegan diet. And he said, oh, you couldn't do that. Nobody can do that. Okay. Because he couldn't do it,
yeah.
because he had the addiction.
So
Okay.
yeah,
Because you might have an addiction doesn't mean you should impose that restriction on someone else. And the reality is that as humans, we come into this world with only one taste, the taste for our mother's milk.
right.
Every other taste is acquired. If you can acquire a taste, you can disacquire it. You can get rid of it. And it typically doesn't take more than about a week to break the addiction. Although if you then relapse, it'll come right back. Okay? But you can kill an addiction up to just about anything in a week. You just keep away from it from a week, and you'll be able to keep, the lust for it will disappear, and you should be able to keep away from it. So I really don't like it when a medical person says to me, oh, well, you couldn't do that. It's too difficult.
So I agree.
Don't undermine people.
Yeah. So I agree with you 100%. I don't want you to think I'm off the track with this. And I have a quick story for that too. So I mentioned the study that we did in aged mice, this very high soluble fiber diet, rich in fruits and vegetables. Again, not vegan. Fish was a part of the diet. So I also wanted to do this study in people, in older adults, older than 65. So I submitted the same idea, with all of the background and all of the logical flow. And I have a history of getting grants. It's not like this is my first trick at the song and dance, right? So I submitted it to the NIH, and a few of the reviewers' comments actually said just what you said. Even if this works in your small study, most people are not going to adhere to this diet. So what's the point? And they gave it a bad score. Fortunately, I was able to get that study funded. So we have an active clinical trial doing it in older adults. And I don't
Right.
know what's going on in terms of the data, but that mindset, like you said, so I'm with you 100%. Like, there are still people out there that are like, I can't do it. So probably nobody can do it. It may take longer than a week. I should say, as someone who has a problem with junk food and grew up on it, it took me longer than a week to unplug that from that matrix
I,
over a long period of time.
I'll reference you to Mary Riggins' book. You can get it on Amazon. She's a doctor of Oriental medicine, and she's written a book on that subject specifically. And I think she indicates a week. And I certainly agree with that. Anyway, it's a free download for any of your readers. I'm trying to remember the name of it, but her name is Mary Riggin, Riggin.
Nice. All right. So then vegan, but then recently you added fish back in, and
Yeah, we eat some salmon, and that's related to my wife's condition. It was strongly recommended because of her mental issues that we get more salmon into her diet. So living with her, that's what we eat once a week.
and then with the salmon. So when considering you cut out all animal products, have you had any relapse in terms of the allergies and the symptoms that you had before, or everything's still?
I haven't noticed any. Um, we do buy wild caught salmon, not farm raised. I wouldn't eat any of these farm raised fish. God knows what they're feeding them. I have no confidence, uh, full of probably antibiotics and everything else. Just keep away from that. And it's one of the problems, like when you look at meat, for example, when I was a child, all meat was organic. All meat was non genetically modified. Okay. Uh, Meat in those days was about 15% fat. If you buy meat today, it will be probably 50% fat. And that applies to chicken or uh, beef or pork or anything else. However, if you're a hunter and you go out and hunt deer or bear or something in the wild, that meat probably, is not too bad. First of all, it's not going to be packed full of antibiotics. Secondly, it's going to be about 15% fat. And yeah, and when I was a child, we would eat a roast beef every Sunday, the family. And the roast had about a mass of 2 to 3 pounds. And it served the five of us for 5 days, which is a little bit like meat eating today, where people will eat an 8-ounce steak or something, um, just so different, right?
Yeah, I wonder how much, and just to play the devil's advocate, how much of it was the animal products and not enough plant-based products, right? It raises the question of what is the optimal diet in terms of, and without even looking at biomarkers, just from a, just a general recommendation, it's how much animal stuff and how much plant-based stuff would, keep you satiated and minimize CVD risk and potentially, maximize your health and longevity.
Well, you're taking a scientific approach to it. And my approach is, hey, if it works for me, that's all I need. And I go back to if you've got a problem in CVD or diabetes or cancer, do a 1 or 2 month trial and see if it works for you. If it doesn't, you haven't lost a lot.
Or at the very least, cutting out all the junk, cutting out all processed food, starting there, right? That would be the first place to start, let alone, changing it completely.
Well, it was sort of interesting. When I did this, I just went 100%. In Esselstyn's book, he has this lovely chapter titled Moderation Kills. Like, how much arsenic do you want to eat today? Like, just go for broke. And then if that doesn't work for you, okay, so it didn't. But I think that for probably 80 or 90% of people, it would solve a lot of problems.
And also maybe obviously not eating as much in terms of calories, right? So if you're eating more plant-based foods, it allows you to optimize your body weight better. You can probably maintain a lower body weight, a multitude of health conditions, even if it's not CVD or
Well,
cancer.
as you saw with your mice, when you got them onto a decent diet, it didn't matter how much they ate.
But they were eating real food. This wasn't a purified diet versus just a lot of fruits and veggies. This was, what the gold standard is thought of in rodent studies, which is
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah. Anyway, what I found is the Esselstyn diet didn't ask me to count calories, and I didn't.
Cool. All right. So what does an average day of eating look like right now for you?
Well, typically I don't eat anything till noon. Sometimes if I've done a little more of a workout and I'm feeling hungry, I'll have a piece of toast with peanut butter. I have coffee in the morning, decaf, black, no sugar, no whitener or milk or anything like that. For lunch, I usually have a salad, and it's often the same salad, more or less. So, for example, today the salad consisted of a spoonful or two of a 5-bean salad that we make. Mix of 5 different beans, some red pepper, a little bit of frozen corn, I think, whatever. Then we make a batch of that every week or two, and it keeps well. Then some lettuce, a handful of blueberries, a slice of papaya, some kimchi. I think that's probably what was on the plate. And then I had some hummus, and I eat some of the blue corn chips, which are almost junk food, but I have this issue of trying to get some grains into me. And that's the way I get grains, because I can't eat gluten. We do make our own bread, gluten-free bread, and sometimes I have that. But that was lunch. And I also had some soup, which I make in a pressure boiler. I take some lentils and some celery and carrots and two or three other veggies and throw them into the pressure cooker and cook it up and make a soup. And I do that. And then I think this evening we're probably having salmon. Otherwise, we might have scrambled tofu on toast or baked beans on toast. Or last night we had slices of tomato with basil, some olive oil, and a little bit of mozzarella cheese.
So dairy has made a
A
presence.
little bit of dairy, yeah. Yeah. And that's a dish that I had in London, 2 or 3 months ago, and we've had that once or twice since.
And then, so they're
We
eating
would go
window.
through, pardon?
Oh, go ahead.
We would
Sorry.
go through a pound of cheese, maybe,
Yeah,
between the two of us.
the cheese is a dangerous one for me. I have to avoid it as my biomarkers don't look better, unfortunately, when it's in my approach. But even I have it in
We're all
the
different. Yeah, we're all different.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so your eating window then. All right, so then after the salmon or the tomato with olive oil and the mozzarella cheese, I'm guessing you're getting that fresh, the ball, right? The mozzarella ball,
Yeah.
not this processed stuff in a can with preservatives.
Mozzarella ball. And so one of those balls, we would use about half of that between the two of us. So it's not a huge amount of cheese. I think a quarter of a pound, something like that.
And then anything after that, or that's the last meal of the day.
That's the last meal of the day.
So your eating window is from 12 to around what time?
Around seven,
Seven. So,
7:30.
so then basically a 17-hour fast
Yeah.
every day.
Yeah.
Nice. And in terms of diet variety, I think you mentioned, switching up a little bit, salmon or the beans, on toast. How is your diet basically the same every day? Or is there a lot of variety? Or you just eat whatever, it's just as much plant-based as you can?
So our lunch is usually more or less what I described, but it varies in terms of what's in it. It's fruits and veggies. And then the supper, we have about 7 or 8 different dishes that we cycle through.
What are some of the other ones? I mean, people want to know what the diet is of someone who's, right? And your
Well,
yeah.
as I said, scrambled tofu and baked beans on toast, and we have rice with some Indian curry type stuff on it. I don't really focus on food as much as you are.
Interesting. What about nuts, seeds, walnuts, peanuts, almonds, any of that?
We eat some walnuts, we eat some nuts, those little cans of mixed nuts, maybe a couple of those in a month. Esselstein is very against nuts, okay? What we do try and do is make sure we don't have seed oils. We do eat a little bit of olive oil. But yeah, it's just not the whole focus of our lives. Unfortunately, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm curious what your overall diet is, right? People may want to try to replicate your approach, whether it's in terms of what you're eating,
Well, what I would say is, get Esselstein's book, and the last half of it is good recipes. And if not his book, there's a book by Michael Greger, who's wrote the book How Not to Die, and that's a good book to read for anybody. But he also has the book that goes with it, which is How Not to Diet, I think. And he talks, gives proper recipes in there. It used to be that there were almost no sources of recipes in this area. And so we used to have quite a number of them on our website, but we really dropped that because there's so many books available now. And for people who are really interested in this and want an interesting experience, there's a cruise that goes out of Miami called the Holistic Holiday Cruise. And it's about a week long. And you go out on this ship And the people who organize it take their own chefs and their own food, and they take over the kitchens on the ship. And so you get fed this kind of a diet for the whole week. And of course, if you're a little on the naughty side, you can go to the other kitchen, which the ship has. But they have really great food on this for the week. And they also have good speakers, people like Esselstein or Joel Kahn, who's my cardiologist, who's written the book, what is it? The plant-based solution. And a number of speakers like that who are very good. And so it can be very motivational. And you're there with a group of 1,500 or so like people who are doing this same path, which can be very supportive, because it's difficult often for people to do something like this by themselves. And particularly, I know in our family, the rest of the family think I'm nuts. And they're probably right, but I'm alive and I'm healthy.
You're eating real food. I don't know how it's crazy when that's what's nuts, right? So, all right, wait. So, when is the cruise for people who may be interested?
It's in the spring. You should be able to find it with a Google Holistic Holiday Cruise. I think it's in the March timeframe. And I know they've been sending me emails. I've been on the cruise with Christine, my wife, about 3 times. We're not going this coming year. But very, very, very nice cruise. Very, very good way to spend a week.
Nice. All right. So back to the diet. So not counting calories, mostly satiated, where obviously the drive to overeat in your case is, I mean, I think most people struggle with that, but both of those things, not a factor. You're not counting calories and you're satiated where
It was just so simple to do this diet. 9 words, 4 of them the same. No fish, no meat, no dairy, no added oils. And I was on that diet completely for the first 8 years after I read the book. And we only switched to incorporating some fish when my wife got seriously damaged by ciprofloxacin and fluoroquinolone, which, by the way, if you're out there and you're being treated for anything, don't let anybody give you a fluoroquinolone. They're banned in most countries, but in this country, the United States, they are allowed with what the FDA calls a black box warning, which means they give you a piece of paper with the prescription and it's got a message on it. The message is enclosed in a black box, and you're ill and you're eating this supplement, this drug to get yourself better, and you're not up to reading this legalistic medical type stuff that's on a piece of paper. Your doctor said, take it, so you do. And unfortunately, my wife, after 4 days, could barely walk. Her tendons were almost destroyed, and that's recovering. The tendons, as you perhaps know, turn over very, very slowly as cells. Life of up to 10 years or something. She's been at this for 5 years, and so her tendons are much better now. But it's created permanent damage to her brain. We haven't yet found a way of recovering that, affecting her short-term memory and her executive function. And very, very difficult.
what were they trying to treat her for in the first place?
Urinary infection. Standard diagnosis or treatment is Cipro, which is the short term for ciprofloxacin, and it's one of a category of about 4 of these, which are called fluoroquinolones. And the damage that my wife had is bad. There are other people who have been completely damaged for life. If you go to the websites, you can Google these websites. A woman who, was a competitive athlete in, I can't remember what sport, had this treatment, and now she's crippled. It just takes a few days. I know 2 or 3 doctors who have had Cipro and are now injecting themselves with amniotic exosomes to counter the effects, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to continue their practice. But they didn't know either. The doctors don't know.
So I was going to ask about exercise, but this is a good segue into your focus on rejuvenation tech, because I think you're doing a whole bunch of stuff that most people either don't know about or So, is your wife doing some of the rejuvenation based therapy that you're currently doing in order
Yeah,
to?
we do most of these not together. I usually do them first. I'm the guinea pig, and if I survive, then we usually try them with her. And yeah, I've done quite a number of things. Uh, so, oh gosh, where to start? I gave a talk on Radfest, or I guess it was down in Colombia or Venezuela earlier this year, and I realized at the end of the talk that I was talking to medical doctors, and they were just stunned by what I was talking about and really couldn't absorb it. It was just too much, all the things I have done. So it's sort of hard to say where would one start. Let me mention a couple of things that you can do in the United States, because some of the other stuff is more esoteric and you have to do medical tourism. Um, there are things that are called peptides, Cavinson peptides in particular. And I don't know what your audience is like, but I think probably most people know or have heard of amino acids and know that they're important to the body. And if you string amino acids together in chains or whatever, you get, if there aren't too many of them, say less than 50 amino acids, we usually call that a peptide. And if you get into larger numbers, then we typically call that a protein. Um, so, for example, well, I'll come to that later. But anyway, um, Cabinson was a research scientist in the head of the Institute of Bioregulation and Gerontology in St. Petersburg, Russia. And he developed a suite of peptides that are only 2 or 3 or 4 amino acids long. And these are available. Let me just reach over here. They come in little packages like this. This one is Visolutin, and Visolutin is to treat the eyes. And this will be a peptide of about 2 or 3 amino acids. And
Hang on, Kenneth, is that taken orally or that's like a drop that you put directly on the eyes?
well, this particular version is a capsule. And so I take typically in a given month, I take about 5 to 7 different peptides from the Cavinson suite. I'm part of an ongoing trial to replicate results that are being done in Russia. And so this particular package costs about $45. It has 20 capsules in it. You take 2 capsules a day for 10 days, and then that's it. Every month, I take a different mix of about 5 to 7 different peptides of the Cavinson suite. I've been doing that for about 4 years now, I think 3.5 years. And it's difficult to say exactly what the impact is, except that occasionally we see very specific improvements. So, for example, I know that the Visolutin, when I take it, helps my vision a bit. Okay, I can read the newspaper, struggling a little bit maybe without my readers. Okay, there's a version of Visolutin which you can take sublingually, you squirt it under your tongue, and sometimes I use that instead of the capsules. One of the peptides is called Seralutin, which is targeted at the brain. And the first time that my wife took Seralutin, we saw a profound impact within a day or two. So we can sometimes see that impact. Sometimes it's more evenly dispersed in terms of its impact. But taking this for 3 or 4 years, I have to believe that it has helped me in terms of my general physiology. If I can't measure anything specifically, try and keep up with me on the dance floor. Okay.
Right. Yep. So peptides, and then you've also done, I think, follistatin gene therapy.
yes, let me just say one more thing about the
Yeah.
peptides. One of the things that they determined in the studies in Russia was that if you took this program for about 3 to 5 years, your survival rate was double or triple your others in your peer group. So if you're trying to stay alive, which hopefully everybody is, this would be a good thing to get into. You take it for 3 to 5 years. As I say, I'm taking 5 to 7 of these so it's costing me $350 a month. Okay. Keeps me alive. It's the bargain. So you were talking about follistatin.
Yeah, real quick. People always are asking me on the channel. They're like, "Are you going to take this peptide or that peptide?" And my first response is, "Which of my biomarkers do you expect it to improve?" So now I'm going to have to do a deeper dive into, the studies that you're mentioning, to see if, there's something there that maybe I could benefit from. So yeah, so follistatin gene therapy.
But we can talk offline, but I can put you in touch with the person who's running this study.
Cool.
Okay. Follistatin gene therapy. Okay. So this is not something that you can do in the United States. You can get this treatment offshore. I was part of a clinical trial, as was my wife. I did it 3 months before she did. Follistatin is a protein. It has a weight of something like, I think, 235 kDa. And follistatin is a naturally occurring protein in the human body, probably in most mammalian bodies. Has been applied or used in the agricultural industry for years to bulk up the weight of beef cattle and so on. People who are into muscle building, weight building, and so on have been injecting themselves with follistatin into their muscles for years. It's safe. Follistatin, as I say, occurs naturally in the human body. But what happens is that for various reasons, our bodies start to deteriorate and we lose muscle mass and skeletal structure and so on. And so the body, sensing this very wisely, increases the amount of follistatin you have. However, it can't keep up. And so that's how people can end up being very frail and so on. Now, the follistatin gene therapy is done by giving an injection of plasmids. And I'm not sure how much your audience would know what plasmids are, but essentially they're just circular strings of DNA which are encoded to produce the protein follistatin. And as it's developed by minicircle, in addition to having that piece of DNA to create the follistatin, it has another piece of DNA which is sort of a killer switch, as it's called. So that when you get this injection of the follistatin plasmid from minicircle, if you were to have a serious adverse reaction and wanted to turn it off, you just take an injection of, I think it's like doxycycline or something like that, and that will wipe out what the injection was. So there was a really nice safety factor. When I do these things, I'm really concerned about living and continuing to live. So I need to know enough about the science and the safety to actually do it. And so, as I say, everybody has follistatin. If you're losing muscle mass and bone mass, sarcopenia, whatever, osteoporosis, you want to counter that somehow, and you can do that, it seems, with an injection of this plasmid from minicircle. Now, I had the injection 2 years ago, and we're just doing now the 2-year measurements to see how it looks after 2 years. What we have seen are the following. We did a follow-up at 3 months. And in 3 months, the effect of, I guess I should also mention that these plasmids, they're injected into your abdomen and they replicate. So you continue to produce this. You're creating essentially a little follistatin factory in your abdomen. And this follistatin factory in my body in 3 months doubled the amount of follistatin in my blood serum.
3 months later, it was double. Nice, nice.
And another 3 months, it had gone up another 50%.
Wow.
It went from 8.5, and I can't remember the units, whatever they are. It went from 8.5 to 17 in 3 months, and then up to 22 or 24, I think,
But the
in
big,
six
but
months.
but the big deal would be an improvement in muscle mass, right? So I think what follistatin inhibits myostatin, which allows muscle to, right, to grow to hypertrophy, right? So
Yeah.
did
So
you
there's two
notice?
way, two ways you can measure that. You can actually do a DEXA scan, and we did DEXA scans, and my lean muscle mass increased by, I think, about 4 or 5 pounds. Now, I only weigh 120 pounds, and you know more than I what percentage of my body would be lean muscle if I weigh 120 pounds. So a 5% or a 5 pound increase or a 4 pound increase, whatever it was, is pretty significant. But, I don't measure things the way you lab people do. I measure it and what does it do to me? And when I went to this treatment was done in Roatan in Honduras. When I went to Honduras, I went through the Miami airport and I had my rollerboard suitcase with me. And if you've ever been to Miami airport, it seems that you always arrive at a gate at one end and leave from a gate at the other end, and it's a mile away. And so I had to pull this thing the mile down there. But on the way to Roatan, I had to stop a couple of times just to rest and recover my breath as I was going from one end to the other. I got to Roatan, I had the treatment, I came back, and 2 months later, before we even did the 3 month follow-up, I was out running. And I can run now. Now, I'm not, a 4 minute miler, but I couldn't run before the follistatin treatment. I can run now. I run a couple of blocks, rest, run a couple more blocks. I can do that. And that's just incredible. And even more important, because running is boring, I can dance. And you need to find that little video of me dancing at Dublin, at the Longevity Summit Dublin back in June. It was sort of funny because, the music starts, and music starts, I dance, and I get up and I'm dancing. And then I sort of look around, and there's all these longevity geeks, young people like you, and they're standing at the side looking at me. Some of them can actually sway in time to the music. Very few of them were moving. And, that's what follistatin does for me. So it's just really exciting. But the thing that is also really significant and important to me with respect to the follistatin treatment is that it's truly rejuvenative in the following sense. It was one injection that took 30 seconds. And 2 years later, I'm still seeing the benefits. And we need treatments in this longevity space where we focus on rejuvenation and we come up with therapies that are like that. Like if I have to repeat this every 2 years, fine. What I don't want is something I have to do every day. Okay? That's not solving a problem in any sense. Creating this little follistatin factory in my abdomen is dealing with a real problem. And the other thing that comes about as a result of that, I think, is that, and essentially putting that follistatin injection into my abdomen was a systemic treatment. What it did really is it gave a resource to my body. Okay? And my body chose what to do with it. It was under control of my body. It wasn't a doctor putting an injection into a particular muscle to get me a bigger muscle. It was giving a resource to my body so that my body can decide how to allocate that resource. And one thing it did very quickly is it zapped my heart. It gave me that extra cardiovascular capacity. And that was not necessarily predicted or expected or anything else. My body said, look, you need this. And that's what it did. Now, the other side of that statement is that when you come up with a therapy which will do this kind of thing for a body, you're freeing up the other resources in the body to be better utilized. You're augmenting the total pool that's available. And your body will typically figure out how to use that most effectively. That's what our DNA, which has been coded through our evolutionary development, that's what it's designed to do. It's designed to use those resources if we can give them in a systemic way. And so what I look for in therapies for longevity is I look for rejuvenative therapies that can be injected or otherwise administered systemically and let my body decide what to do with it. And then I really do get true rejuvenation, I believe. And so, the follistatin therapy has just been incredible for me. And the results are there. Now, I should mention that quite a number of people who get the follistatin therapy report no particular improvement in anything. And you might say, well, why is that the case? Well, quite a number of those people, as I understand it, were fairly young. Well, if you're young, your body is generating enough follistatin. So, one of the things that I think is really true, and I think more people are starting to understand that, is that if you're dealing with therapies for longevity, you really want to be trying them on people like me who have, in some sense, degenerated to the extent that what you're doing can show improvement. And so please don't stop allowing people over 80 to participate. And I'm hoping, I'm very hopeful that with the RFK Jr. Coming into the fold, that we'll start to see some improvements in these areas, because certainly on the nutrition side, he's got, really important ideas, and hopefully we'll see some improvements on approving things, coming back to your comment on getting approval for testing on humans. I'm sick of people killing mice. Let's get this stuff to humans. We have, at the moment, at least 3 separate processes underway to deal with cardiovascular disease. And all of these have come up against the roadblock of getting approval to test in humans. Because what they're doing is they're not doing a statin-like test. They're coming up with solutions that will remove atherosclerotic plaque. I'm invested in one of these companies, which is called Repair Biotechnologies. They have a protein, an enzyme that will catabolize the atherosclerotic plaque. It basically takes that insoluble chunk of goo and breaks it into something that's water soluble, and it flushes out of the body.
How does the protein get into the body? Does it have to be administered IV or orally?
The testing that's been done so far is on mice and now on non-human primates, and that's all been through injection. Down the road, who knows? But the injections would be fairly simple. But the important thing is that, again, this is a systemic type of a treatment, and you don't do it every day for the rest of your life. You do it, it clears the mess up, and maybe you have to do it again in 5 years or whatever. But you're really removing and reversing the damage. You're rejuvenating. There's another company called Cyclarity. It's got the same issue, slightly different approach, deals with different aspects of the plaque. But again, it's run up against this roadblock at the FDA because they're not used to people coming up with therapies that will rejuvenate. They can't cope with that. It's not part of their mandate,
Yeah. This is another can of worms, right? The regulations. I know I've always heard Bill Falloon, life extension,
Yep.
complaining about the FDA being in his way and allowing people to make their own choices when it comes to supplements. Uh, it's a big problem when big bad government gets in the way of life-saving interventions. So
Well, in our charter in this country, we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And how did the government get into stopping me from deciding that I want to try something with my body? Absolutely atrocious. We're making a little bit of progress in Montana where they have a certain right to try legislation, but that only applies if the therapy has already passed a safety test. So, for example, if you have a drug A and it's been approved or at least gone through safety testing for some reason or other, a physician can then take that and apply it to some other application because it's now considered safe. Uh, Now, think about follistatin. One of the safest things you could possibly inject. Uh, but of course, now we're talking a bit of DNA. Oh my God. And it's important to understand that the bureaucrats who have to deal with this and make these decisions have an objective function, something that they're trying to maximize, and that is their careers. Okay, if I know this, I was a bureaucrat in the government in Canada at one point. You don't want to make a mistake. If you make a mistake, your career is shot.
right, but it's your choice. If it's your choice, the problem becomes when people start suing other people, right? But if you've made a decision for your body, your life, it shouldn't, you know what I'm saying? So,
Exactly. I
yeah,
should be able to. Now, then they say, well, you're not educated enough to make a choice.
that's a problem. That's insulting on its own, right? So, which
Yeah.
as if they know better, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah. Come on. Uh, and I should be able to sign a waiver, and that's it. And of
yeah.
course, anytime I do these things, I'm signing waivers. Doesn't bother me. I'm not worried about it. We get into some stupid things that add to the costs. One of the companies I've invested in has a treatment for the eyes, and you might be familiar with presbyopia. It sort of hits people at the age of 40 or 50 or so, and they have to wear reading glasses or whatever. Now, presbyopia is caused by crosslinks in the lens, the cells of the lens. And so we have a treatment which will break those crosslinks and restore the flexibility to the lens and thereby avoid the need for reading glasses. And reading glasses, by the way, do not cure presbyopia. They're just, the best we can do, but we tend to think of it as a solution. Anyway, the problem we run into is that even to try this on humans, the solution that we use, and we use it on rabbits and mice or something, we have to get it made in a special factory that's approved by the government because it has to be sterile under some kind of government requirements, right? Now think about it. Have you ever walked down the street of a big city? All the crap that's going into your eyes? Take
Yeah.
downtown Boston some days, right?
I get the drive for safety on the one hand, but yeah, just like you mentioned, we're living in how's junk food not, how's that legal, and alcohol, and you've got all these things that are potentially bad, and yet you can buy them in abundant excess, and it seems like they don't care, right? So
Yeah,
you
yeah.
you know the story though. You've got big corporations that are in the hands of government, and government wants to, yeah, anyway. So
Well, it drives up the price of everything. But what really annoys me is, take, for example, the atherosclerotic treatment that Repair are developing. And I'm hoping that I will be able to get it in the next year or so. Uh, it won't be approved for maybe 5 years, 7 years.
in this country, somewhere else though,
Who knows? We're looking at those options. But if you think about it, we lose 600,000 people a year in this country to cardiovascular disease and another 150,000 to strokes. But we can't administer this to people now because maybe somebody will die. Hello? Like this is
Yeah.
just sheer stupidity. And that's the kind of problem that we need to get on top of. And for somebody who is my age, chronologically, do you know what my life expectancy is at this point?
Not sure. I mean, you've already passed your average life.
But I'm past my life expectancy. But at any age, you have a certain life
Remaining
expectancy.
remaining life expectancy. Yeah. So what's
Yeah,
your expected remaining?
I think it's 6 years or something.
Hmm.
So now I got to wait, 6 or 7 years for
Yeah.
approval.
Yeah, it's not right. It's crazy. And this is where, if I were you, it's like I've got to get in the face of these government officials who are getting in the way of promoting my health and longevity, right? So,
Yeah, and so to the extent that I can get in their face, fine. Uh, but I also have to survive myself, and so I'll go where I have to. And
yep.
fortunately, I can afford to do that. And one of the great things that you have when you reach my age is you really become free. I don't give a damn. Okay, I don't care if you're a government official, forget it. And I'm fortunate enough to have a variety of citizenships, and if I have to, I can go to another country.
Yeah. All right. So with that in mind, so then stem cells and then also exosomes, I think you've done or are still doing both of those too.
Yeah. So stem cells, there's a whole range of different stem cell treatments that are out there. This, of course, all came out of the work of Yamanaka back in 2006, who developed or determined that we could reverse a human cell back to a very primitive embryonic type state through manipulating what we now call the Yamanaka factors. And so there's sort of two things that came out of that. One is that we developed a whole range of stem cell treatments, but I think equally important, at least for many of us, is we now believe that it's possible to reverse the age of the body. And the difference between one cell in the body is like the difference between the Wright brothers flyer and the 787 that you flew across the Atlantic on the other day. Okay. So two things came out of it. But on the stem cell side, um, there are a lot of different people using a lot of different treatments and ways of applying stem cells. And most of them are creating stem cells for therapeutic use that are fairly large in the sense that they can't get through the smaller capillaries in the body, so they can't be treated systemically. Now, the stem cells that I've been getting are somewhat different. And this comes out of research that was done in Cambridge, England. And these are what are called VSELs, very small embryonic-like stem cells. And the work in Cambridge determined that our blood cells contain very small stem cells that become dormant during the fetal stage of development. They're in your body forever, but they don't do anything. Why they're still there, I don't know. And, evolutionary wise, you'd think they might have gone, but whatever. However, what they determined in Cambridge was that it was possible to reactivate these stem cells, these VSELs. And the therapy as it now exists is the following. We take a sample of blood, 60, 70 cc's, 66 cc's, I think is what they use, of blood, and you spin it down using a centrifuge to create or extract the PRP, the platelet-rich plasma. And then you take this platelet-rich plasma and you activate it, which is where the embryonic stem cells are. You activate that using light of a particular frequency, laser light type of application. And then you re-inject that into the body. So from a safety point of view, what you've got is a very safe situation. You've got a bit of your own blood being extracted, being treated with a light, which doesn't touch it other than to radiate it, and you stick that back in your body. So it really couldn't be anything safer than that. The question is, does it work? And what we find is that it's incredibly effective. Now, the body can be targeted. As I said, this is a systemic treatment. So you just inject it back into your arm, an IV push. But you can target to some extent where those stem cells will go by radiating parts of the body with that same laser light. And it's a particular device. It's called an SONG laser, and it penetrates into the body tissues. And you can target, for example, the brain or the vagus nerve or a knee or whatever. And the VSELs will be somewhat attracted into that area so as to be active there. And we have seen, both my wife and I, some very significant success with this. So, for example, I had my vagus nerve treated, and the vagus nerve is the one that goes between the brain and the gut. And my digestive system has been a mess for decades, probably as a result of far too many antibiotics. And when it was treated with this VSEL treatment the other week, or a few months ago, actually now, my digestive system changed overnight.
How so? What did you notice that was different?
Much, much better, much better. My digestive system is just working a lot better than it did. The one thing that might be a little bit negative is I seem to have put on a couple of pounds. I'm going to have to take a look at that.
So better digestion, maybe eating more food or extracting more energy from food.
Probably extracting more from the food. My wife has had, as I said, some mental issues from the Cipro, and we treated her brain with this. And the day after she was treated, we were talking about taking her back to the clinic for some follow-up therapies. And so I said, well, I'll spend the morning with you, but after the morning session, you can go back to my son's home where we were staying in an Uber because I want to go to an AI conference. And she looked at me and said, AI conference? I'm going. And she's a mathematician, not a surprising thing for a mathematician to say, but she'd been so out of it that I was just stunned. And then she said, oh my gosh, I've got to get my hair done. Oh my gosh, I've got to get a dress to wear. And she was just a different person in 24 hours. So, that was really pretty incredible stuff. It's affected my knees. They're much better. I had a problem where 40 years ago now, I was running on a beach in the Bahamas and I damaged my right knee. And, I was back in the days when people said no pain, no gain, and it started to hurt. I just kept going. Now I know if there's pain, you stop. Okay. Anyway, I had this injection and my knee was repaired in about a week. I haven't had any trouble with it since. It's just amazing stuff. And again, you can target it to some extent, but on the other hand, it's a resource that's there and it goes where it goes. I've got a lot of respect for my brain and my DNA. I'm sure it'll look after me.
Right. All right. So then exosomes, have you also done exosomes?
Yeah. Now, exosomes, of course, again, there's huge variety in what exosomes are. It really just means small particles in a sense. The exosomes that I get are from amniotic fluid. And there's a company in Miami called CRM, Center for Regenerative Medicine, under a Dr. Farshan. And they run the American Academy of Stem Cell Physicians. And they take the amniotic fluid from full-term healthy baby births, and they process that in various ways, including filtering it by size so that the exosomes that you're getting are less than, I think it's 125 nanometers, small enough that the immune system won't react to them. And we just inject that. Now, this is a somewhat riskier kind of treatment in a sense, because every batch of amniotic exosomes is different. It comes from different births. And so the CRM do a very detailed process to make sure that's as safe as possible. Um, the treatments that we've taken have been very effective. Uh, my wife was damaged her tendons with this Cipro treatment. And for the first year or so afterwards, she was just in continual pain. Uh, she had a treatment of the amniotic exosomes. And 3 weeks later, she woke up one day and she said, I don't hurt. Now, she still does have some tendon pain after 5 years, but the reduction after one treatment was just immense. And so we've done, each of us, probably half a dozen of these treatments. The first time I had it, I couldn't believe I was just on such a high. But you've got these exosomes, which, if you think about what they are, these are the things that take an egg, a fertilized egg, and turn it into a full-blown human being. The nutrition that's in that is incredible.
Not just nutrition, you've got signaling molecule metabolites that could be, and they're youthful in the youthful state. So
A whole range of these things. Yeah.
do you know who Dave Pascoe is? The 62-year-old, he's pretty popular these days. Well, all the days. But anyway, 62 years old, in the same category as Brian Johnson. He looks about 20 years younger than he is. Fantastic shape. He mentioned the same thing that you said about exosomes, where after he got them, he felt like he was on a high, where he had a shoulder issue that once he got the exosomes injected, it went away. And then he went back to the gym and overdid it. And sure enough, it came back. But he couldn't, it was only because of the exosomes that he was able to have that healing in the shoulder in the first place. But the high that you mentioned, he also said that too. It's so amazing.
Yeah. And, relatively speaking, it's not an expensive therapy. And you can get that in the United States. Now, one of the things is that every batch of exosomes is different. And so the FDA will never approve this because they believe only in pure, it's got to be identical every time. But doctors can do this as long as they don't claim it will achieve anything. Okay? But I know doctors who are using the amniotic exosomes like we have to counter the effects of Cipro. Crazy system.
You've got me thinking that it can't be hard to isolate exosomes. I mean, if you get a filter that's selective enough to not allow if you just, granted it's amniotic fluid, but we have exosomes. Technically, you could take someone's younger blood, like your son's blood, and isolate exosomes with the filter that's specific for a certain, size of an exosome, right? And I don't know, I'm just thinking if there were ways to do this at home, but anyway.
Yeah, well, the problem is that if it comes from different sources, it will never get approved.
Right.
Unless you could say that you've got exactly the same exosomes. It's not a size issue, it's more than that.
Right, but how would someone know if I'm isolating, my blood or my family's blood in my own house? How would they know if I've
Yeah.
got a centrifuge and a filter?
I personally think it's a very safe treatment. There have been tens of thousands of people who have had it, apparently. Yeah.
All right,
And
yep.
you just have to find yourself a medical doctor who will agree to do it. And if you need to, contact me and I can put you in touch with the right people to provide it.
Cool. All right, so those are the big ones, I think, but are there other therapies? I know you do IV vitamin and mineral drips. I think you take NMN, to increase NAD, or maybe not.
I've taken NMN. I haven't particularly found that it makes a difference, or maybe it doesn't anymore and it did at first. It's one of those things. I think one of the more interesting ones that I take is D&Q, dasatinib plus quercetin. Okay. And so tomorrow, in fact, I will take a dose with my wife, and we do this once every 2 months. We take 50 milligrams of dasatinib and 1,000 milligrams of quercetin. And dasatinib, for those who don't know, is a drug that's used in the treatment of a certain cancer, and I don't know which one it is. So, it's passed the safety test, at least for a kind of cancer. in humans. It's also being tested by James Kirkland at the Mayo Clinic. He's running a whole series of tests on dasatinib plus quercetin. And I asked him a couple of years ago, when we would see the results of his work, and he said, oh, 5, 7 years. And we discussed this a few minutes ago. I don't wait for 5 to 7 year studies to complete. So we just do it. And yeah, the target is senescent cells. And, you're keen on measurements, and I have measurements of my senescent cell burden, and it's very, very low. And it stays down there. And does this make a difference? I don't know, but it doesn't cost me anything to do this. And I really believe that it does work. Certainly the indications are. But the more interesting therapy that I use for dasatinib is based on a comment by James Kirkland a couple of years ago at the conference in Copenhagen. And he reported that they were doing a study with sheep where they were giving them a shampoo of dasatinib and quercetin. And the hope was that this would extend the wool-bearing life of a sheep. Apparently, sheep bear good wool for maybe 3 years, and then they're put down, as the euphemism goes, because the wool quality is not so good. And they're hoping that this treatment will get maybe an extra year or two out of the quality of sheep. So I looked around my body for wool, and I couldn't find any, but I've got a thinning toupee here, and there's a little bit that's got color at the back here still. And so for the last about 3 months now, I've been using a shampoo of dasatinib plus quercetin mixed into a shampoo that I bought. And I do that a couple of times a week, and who knows what will happen. But I have a friend in London who's been doing this for a year and a half, and there seems to be evidence of new hair growth at the back of her head.
Do you have you and her, have you guys left it on your head? Or you just use it as a shampoo, wash it off? I'd
Yeah,
imagine if you leave it on so that it can permeate the skin.
I leave it on for 5 minutes before I rinse it off. Yeah, and I put it on my eyebrows and all over my head. And these bald areas at the front that used to have hair, I put it there too.
How about skin? I mean, I don't know if you've seen the recent paper where senescent cells in skin, if you transplant senescent cells into young skin, there was an increase in the aged phenotype in the young animals. So senescent cells in the skin are potentially bad. So I wonder if D plus Q could, maybe you're rubbing it on your skin too.
Well, on that topic, let me just pull something else out. Um, I've got a couple of tubes here. So this black one, I was part of the beta test for a product called OneSkin, which is a peptide-based skin cream. And the thing that was interesting about it, this is their currently version of it. They've got the logo on it, so on. As I say, this was unmarked. That's a souvenir from the beta test. So I use OneSkin on my skin. It's a peptide-based skin cream, and it has the characteristic that the peptide will penetrate the outer dermis and go underneath and kill senescent cells.
Hmm.
Now, I did it for about 3 months on the beta test, and I used to have, those age marks, the brown marks that people get, and I had them around here, and they disappeared in those 3 months. And so I continue to use it, but I actually didn't use it for a period of about 6 months, and those dark spots did not reappear. So, I continue to use it. They have 2 or 3 versions. They have one for the eyes to try and reduce the amount of bagginess. It's a more concentrated version of the face cream. And most people say I don't look like an 82-year-old.
Don't look, don't move, don't sound. is stamina. I don't know many 82-year-olds that could, 2 hours, like no problem, so uh, you're doing something more than something, probably a combination of things that work. What other rejuvenation tech did we miss that you're currently doing or have plans to do?
Well, the two that I have plans on are the um, treatment from repair. They have what they call their cholesterol degrading platform,
Yep.
and that will be injections. And as currently formulated, we're looking at an initial trial. This is not necessarily what would occur as a uh, ongoing therapy, but I think just from the point of view of caution, rather than doing a big injection, we're doing 6 injections a week apart. Okay. Um, and we'll probably do this offshore to be able to get it done next year. Certainly hoping that that will happen. Uh, and if there's anybody out there in your audience who is interested in helping to fund the removal of atherosclerotic plaque, please contact me. We do need some more investors in this space. Uh, we've got 600,000 people a year dying in this country for want of something like this. I would hope that there's somebody out there with bigger pockets than I have who could, help us do that. Anyway, that's one of the things. And I don't have nearly the problem that I had 12 years ago. Uh, but on the other hand, I do have it there. Like, for example, uh, you're big on testing stuff and measuring. And so about 5 years ago, my cardiologist, who is, I mentioned Joel Kahn, who wrote the Plant-Based Solution, and you see him on TV a lot. Joel took my CIMT measurement, which is a carotid artery measurement of the thickness of the plaque in the artery or something like that. And, he sent the results off to the Cleveland Clinic for analysis. And a couple of weeks later, he gives me a call and he says, "Great news. You've got the carotid arteries of a 58-year-old. And so was I, 78 or something. He said, "You're really doing well." And I said, "Okay, thanks." Well, we let it sit for a few years. And I guess after about 4 years, 5 years, whatever it was, we tested it again. 2-week delay to get the results. He calls me up. He said, "Ken, you're doing unbelievably. In 4 years, it's gone from from 58 to only 59. And I just said to him, "Joel, it's the wrong direction. We got to restore this." And so, yeah, I want this stuff to get taken out. I've got a need for it to be removed. And from what I saw with my brain on the language of speaking German, I'm hoping that if I have a treatment like that, maybe I'll start speaking Spanish again. I used to speak Spanish. I have more trouble with it now. But that's one area that I'm hoping you'll do something on in this coming year. Now, the other thing that's really exciting that's going on is in the area of mitochondria. And mitochondria are the organelles that are in the cells, which actually generate the energy which let the cells do their thing. And is organelle the right word? I think it is.
Yeah. I was actually going to say symbiotic bacterium because technically they were a bacterium that you know, anyway.
I was just going to express that. You do it much better than I do. But yeah, these are things that coexist in our cells. And a typical cell might have 10,000 of these organelles in there, the mitochondria, and they generate all the action. And what happens over time is these mitochondria can wear out, they become less effective. You can get a very clear picture of that by watching a 5-year-old playing on the street and try and keep up with him. Okay. So we need to try and restore that. And most people, by the time they're my age, are really having a lot of trouble with the energy side of things. I'm not doing too badly. But Matrix a company that's been headed up by a fellow by the name of Tom Benson, uh, is working on mitochondrial transfusion, so to speak. Now, the mitochondria in your body come from the maternal line of your evolution, your development. Your mitochondria are the mitochondria of your mother, and hers are of her mother, and so on. And what Tom Benson has done, and I have some interesting pictures of this, is he's taken the mitochondria in a person and analyzed it from the point of view of looking for damage. And he's taking mitochondria in the female line in his family, 3 generations. His mother, who I think is 90-ish, and I think himself, and then I think a nephew or a niece or something. And you take a look at the damage levels at these different ages, and it's very, very noticeable, the difference in the level of damage, okay? And that's obviously affecting how the body works. So the concept is to take mitochondria from a young person in your female line and replicate that in a chamber, a vat, and then take that and transplant it into your body. And probably through just injection, IV type injection, let it pump in. It was a surprise to us a few years ago to learn that there are mitochondria in the blood serum. And, you know, if you pump a bunch more mitochondria in there and it's good stuff, hopefully it goes in the right place, or maybe we'll learn to target it in some way. Anyway, the thing that's been exciting is that Tom has recently received FDA approval to do the first human trial on this, and that will occur in the next few months, just as soon as we can, in fact, create, manufacture a vat and get stuff generated. And again, if somebody's interested in investing in this field, the company's looking for help. But this particular approval, there's a boy who has a genetic defect in his mitochondria, and he will die within a number of years if he doesn't get a solution. And so the solution that is proposed, as I say, is to take some good mitochondria in his female line and make a batch of this and put it into his body and see what happens. And so the hope is that we can do that sometime in the next 6 months or so. And that's exciting. And the thing that's really nice about it is it's being done with a human. Like they've done this kind of stuff with mice, but that doesn't really do anything for us. Stop killing mice. Let's help people. I'm gonna get a T-shirt that says that. Stop killing mice, help people. Anyway, I think that's exciting, and I'm part of that program. And tomorrow morning, I'm sending my samples off to have my mitochondrial DNA analyzed to see what condition it's in. And we'll see where we go from there.
Are you familiar with the concept of mitochondrial heteroplasmy?
You'd have to explain it to me. I might have heard of it, but I don't
So each
recognize
cell
that.
has, like as you mentioned, a lot of well, depending on where the cell type is, heart versus,
Yeah.
liver versus, all right. So heart would obviously have a lot of mitochondria, but all of those mitochondria aren't in the same functional capacity. You're going to have heteroplasmy, which means that you're going to have, basically a normal distribution where you're going to have, some at the far right side of that distribution that are working fantastically like they did in youth, and some that are absolutely terrible. And on average, average mitochondria. So it's funny because I haven't thought about this in probably 20 years, but when I was a grad student, before I had a thesis project, I was pitching to my advisors at the time, what if we could, because this was, and it may have been James Kirkland who got me thinking about this because, I've been reading his works forever too. But anyway, it's this idea of blocking replication of the poorly functioning mitochondria in a cell while allowing the the healthier mitochondria, more youthful mitochondria to basically predominate as a form of restoring health. So, and I haven't seen anything, published along those lines in the last 20 years. So anyway.
Well, there's quite a group of people working with Tom Benson on this project. Some very top level people out of Stanford and so on. I haven't really gotten very much into the science of it or just how they're planning to do the delivery. Uh, it just strikes me as the kind of rejuvenative kind of stuff that we need to be doing. And yeah, you know, we just these one of the things that upsets me a lot, or a bit anyway, about what we're doing in medical research as it applies to longevity is that we're spending a lot of money treating or trying to treat these diseases of aging, the cardiovascular disease, the diabetes, the cancer. And to me, these are very largely diseases of what you eat. And it would make more sense to be teaching people to eat properly and controlling the food supply so that it is more healthy. But we don't spend enough money on rejuvenative technology. And a little bit, this goes back to how the field has developed over the last couple of decades. In 2002, Aubrey de Grey produced his paper with a couple of colleagues. I don't know who they were, can't remember offhand, where he talked about aging as being something that was a little bit like a car wearing down. And if we got in there and replaced and fixed and so on, we could slow aging at least. And that was a really important step forward. And it's really, to a large extent, as a result of the efforts that Aubrey puts into this, it's become a very dominating part of the longevity space. It was picked up particularly in 2013, I think it was, with the Hallmarks of Aging paper, which really took the same ideas and repackaged them. As near as I can tell, Aubrey never got quite enough credit for his role in all that. But anyway, that just really caused this field to boom, and people are out there spending money, investing in trying to stop these diseases of aging so that we can, whatever, achieve longevity. At the same time, the work in Yamanaka, although it's been respected and there are people working on it, that whole concept of rejuvenation has not really been picked up by the field. And I think that's the big mistake. I think we should be working on rejuvenation. I think we've got the proof of concept. We just need to do it. And I would really like to see people focus more, and this is where I tend to invest. I invest in companies that are at least going part way on the rejuvenation. If we can get rid of the atherosclerotic plaque and have that person healthy for another 5 or 10 years and then treat them again, that's fine. But don't give me a statin, which, it's not even clear they do anything for anybody. The need is to really focus on that rejuvenative side of things. And so these companies that are doing the work like Mitrix or Repair or LentoBio that's going to reverse the damage on the lens and get rid of the presbyopia. This is an eye drop that will be very inexpensive. And you just think of what the impact of that could be on the world. In most of the world, everybody suffers from presbyopia at some point, but in most of the world, people can't afford eyeglasses. And this is a little eye drop that they could be taking for maybe 3 months, and that would give them restorative capability for a few years. And this is what we should be doing. Just
Definitely, yeah. All right, so that was great, Kenneth. So, I think we can go on for hours and hours and hours. We'll have to have a part 2 and part 3. I still have questions that I didn't get to, but
sure.
so if people want to find you, I'll link to your Instagram and X and vivasparkle.com. Is that where people can reach you if they want to invest or donate, or where else can people find you in case?
Yeah. If they can email me, ken@vivasparkle.com.
Cool.
I
All right.
think there's a place on the Viva Sparkle website, I think, but just send me an email. But yeah, there's some really interesting opportunities here. And for those of your audience who've got some of these problems, we do have solutions. We're just up against roadblocks, partly financial and partly governmental. But if you've got the funds, we can probably deliver to you someplace. Uh, I take the VSEL treatments in Panama.
Nice. All right. Well, thanks, Kenneth, and we'll
Oh,
catch up again soon.
great. Nice chatting with you again, Michael. And uh, yeah, exciting. Lots happening. And the important thing is, and this is really the important thing for everybody to take away from this conversation. I think it's really important that you understand that you were born to live, not to die. And that's what the Yamanaka work did. It showed us that that brain, those cells want to be alive. If you let your heart stop beating, you're going to let 140 trillion cells die. Don't do that. Keep them alive and get your mind believing that it wants to live.
Nice. Great
Okay.
words. Thanks, Kenneth.
Great. Nice
All right.
chatting with you. Bye
Ciao.
for now.